Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Um, Welcome to our webinar on reducing student stress skill by skill. It's not just about academics. Wondered if that word stress was an attraction or detraction, but we're seeing a lot of people registered for this webinar, so seems to be a hot topic. Especially in May. Unusual to have so many people interested in a webinar, but we know this is a timeless topic, and some of the tips and tricks that we will hear today from Phyllis Fagel, you may find are not just helpful for your students, but potentially for you, the adults in the room. So each time I speak with Phyllis Fagel, I feel hopeful that we as educators and parents can tackle just about anything our kids present to us. She gives me great confidence that we are capable of raising our children and educating them with gusto and with promise. My recommendation is you may want to watch this webinar again in August to set yourself and your students up for the next school year. It's not just a takeaway for the end of the year. And we will be sending this recording out for your reference and to share with others if you like. I had put a message in the chat box before we get started, encouraging you, if you would, to share what grades you tend to work with most. Is it pre-K to 4, grades 5 through 8, grades 9 to 12, or do you run the gamut of pre-K to 12? We're curious to see, what your area of focus is today. Okay, thank you so much, Cindy, for kicking it off. Um, Got that sweet spot in the middle school. And I know that's a sweet spot for Phyllis as well. 9 through 12. Also, if you can share your primary role, what many of you wear many hats, I'm sure, but curious to hear what specific roles we have here. A lot of 6 through 12. Um, very good. And your specific roles. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So I'm going to click in as you please continue to share that, the grades that you're supporting and your roles. Okay, so the format of today's session will be first some background on Phyllis and me and the work that we do to support students and educators. And then I'll be asking Phyllis to unpack what she sees as the addressable drivers behind student stress and the tried and true strategy she has used and recommends with families and schools when to take with our kids to help them de-stress by gaining control over these matters. Um, we'll provide a takeaway slide with Phyllis's top 10 strategies, and you'll receive that in email later this week. We have, as you see, left the chat open, and so we do look forward to your thoughts and comments along the way. However, if you want to make sure that we're seeing a specific question that won't get buried in the chat, please do put that in the Q&A, and we'll try to be monitoring that at the same time. And then toward the end, so if you stick around for the end of the presentation, Phyllis has a little opportunity to share with you based on 2 of her latest works. So again, please, we hope you'll stay for the whole session and promise to be finished at the top of the hour. As you can see, this session is being recorded, so not only will the slides come out, but also the recording itself. Okay. First thing I'd like to do is just orient you to what we at IntelliSpark do. Some of you, I recognize you out there. Thank you for joining. You're partners of ours. But some of you may wonder why today's topic is so germane for IntelliSpark. So we work with public and independent schools around the country to support their efforts to provide integrated student support to their students. And so often we see that educators are working so hard, but in their own silos, and they aren't working with complete information, or they may be missing critical information that they need to reorient their focus on what the student truly needs right now. So often we hear that they are focused on academic or attendance concerns, only to find that there is quite an underlying issue that needs to be addressed first before a student can focus on academics or even getting to school. So we see these disorganized pieces of a student, but not a clear picture. And what we encourage is through IntelliSpark, our schools will get to see this whole picture of what is going on with the student. This comes in focus. My role at IntelliSpark, this is all you hear about who I am, is I am the Chief Experience Officer. And I take schools on this journey in supporting how they will make the most of using IntelliSpark. I am rewarded and I love my job because I get to see the immense relief that comes when they realize that they are better dialed in to their students' needs and to one another's work. And they now know where to pick up because other things are being done. And so they can devote more time to quality time to spending with the student and not hunting for information in five different places. And lastly, what our goal is to give people the right amount of information, not more than they need, not less than they need, and just around the students that they need. So how does this dovetail with Phyllis's work, and why do we love her work so much? Because in a perfect world, educators can share with one another through IntelliSpark something that they know is a current challenge for a student. Maybe it's an underlying stressor that just happened the night before that's impacting how they're doing today. Or maybe it's an ongoing issue that the student is trying to overcome. And this educator may want to share what are they doing, what's working, what's not working. Could be social skills, could be academic. And we want to accelerate the work of that team to more efficiently help students achieve their goals. So that is who we are at IntelliSpark. Get our little, oops, went forward there. Okay. And so this is why we so greatly appreciate the work of Phyllis, her expertise, because she is determined to accelerate educators' efforts to support the holistic needs of students. For those of you who haven't met Phyllis before, she has been on some of our webinars graciously. I'd like to share a bit of her background. Phyllis is a licensed clinical professional counselor, and as such, she is a therapist working with kids and families in private practice at the Chrysalis Group. She's also a consulting counselor at the Landon School here in the DC metro area, and she is a journalist. She is also the author of Middle School Matters, Middle School Superpowers, and of late, The Wonder Box. More on this later. Phyllis is also co-founder of the Social Playbook app. More on that later. As a journalist, she freelances for publications including The Washington Post, CNN, Working Mother, US News and World Report, and Your Teen. And her ideas have been shared in outlets including the New York Times, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Edutopia, Mindshift, and NPR. So we are so grateful to have her here today. Please ask her questions when she's not presenting or as she's presenting, and we'll do our best to dip into those. And I think now it is time to get started. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and then I will share my screen again a little bit later. Okay. All right. Well, welcome, Phyllis. There she is. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And again, thank you everyone for priming the chat here with your roles and grades that you're supporting. Phyllis, in your work with children and families in private practice and also in your partnership with educators in independent schools, what are you seeing right now as some of the greatest wellness challenges for students today? And are any of these new, or are these longstanding?
I think it's a mix of both. I'm seeing some uh, challenges that I've seen the entire time I've been a school counselor, things like, the occasional school refusal, the kid who has test anxiety, the kid who's really socially sensitive, the kid who has a really hard time distinguishing between funny and mean. So there are a lot of things that are just perennial challenges that kids face. I think what's different now is that so many of the external factors, things like spending more time online, emerging from the pandemic, spending less time doing unstructured activities. There are so many different reasons why kids have not developed the same social skills as kids, even maybe 8 years older. There's really, I can almost draw a line between the kids who are now, 20 and up and the kids who are still high school and younger. So we're still seeing, my guess is that in about 7 years, we'll have another cycle and we'll have different challenges. What I will say though is that I am not pessimistic because I don't see this as something as aberrant in the sense that it's these kids can't acquire these skills. It's just that they're lagging. So they're about 18 to 24 months behind, and it is a skill building issue. And so we need to just really, in a very intentional way, target the places where they're lagging in skills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, and so what we are also seeing, and I know that you're working with a number of schools on this, is some schools have brought on wellness directors. Many schools have directors of student support. Um, and they're trying to weave all these needs together or supports together to meet this wide array of needs that are often you know influencing one another. So how are you seeing folks in these roles, wellness directors, directors of student support, most effectively getting at some of these skills that you're about to talk about? Is it through primarily one-on-one, which is very labor intensive? Is it through conducting small student groups? Is it integrated strategies across the curriculum? Is it a mix? And are you seeing an area that's particularly fruitful?
I think one of the challenges we have, and this is true whether you have a very robust counseling staff and a lot of adults who really enjoy the work of developing relationships with kids and helping them feel a sense of belonging and connectedness within the school setting. No matter how a school is staffed, no one has enough. No one has enough people.
Mhm.
And we have to make sure we're not siloed because you can have a kid who just connects so well with a coach or with a particular teacher, doesn't necessarily connect with a counselor. You can have a teacher who is really adept at creating the conditions for helping kids start the day with the right mindset. I'm thinking of a teacher I worked with at my last school. It was a K-8, and she had a knitting club in the morning. And it was this meditative activity. She was a really calming presence. And she just jumped in, and kids across the grades, even administrators came. Anyone who knew how to knit and who could help teach the kids how to knit would show up. And so she is an example of somebody who we were smart to leverage to help kids. So we don't want people to stay in their lanes if this is a strength. I also recognize that not everyone has a strength. I know in a lot of settings, maybe everybody is assigned to be an advisor. Everybody is assigned to do this work in some capacity, and some people are more comfortable with it than others.
Mhm.
So what I have really tried to focus on is giving teachers, giving administrators the skills to teach a lot of the same strategies, a lot of the same skill sets that I'm working on, whether it's one-on-one or in a group with kids, but in the context of just their day-to-day interactions, just folding it in and making it an organic part of the day.
Mhm.
But you have to be intentional about it.
Mhm. Is there like a playbook that you give to people that I actually I know middle school strategies, but
Yeah.
how much professional development is necessary to do that?
You do need professional development. And I'll give you an example of how it might show up in a classroom.
Mhm.
This happened to be me because there was a counselor who was teaching a class and he had to leave early. He had an emergency and he asked me to jump in. This is at an all boys school. This was at 2:30 after they had just had sports and just before the end of the day. And I was coming in at the end of the class post sports to fill in with not a lot of information. And not surprisingly, they were completely dysregulated and all over the place. It was hard enough for the teacher who they were expecting to manage it. And one of the strategies that will be on that sheet is helping kids turn on their prefrontal cortex. So when you have a classroom full of dysregulated kids, or you even have a couple of dysregulated kids, and you need to target the whole room in order to help those two kids settle down, you need a science-backed way to do that. And so what I did in that moment, there's one kid who was like swinging a bat against a wall. There was another kid who just kept bouncing a ball that came out of nowhere. I don't even know where the ball materialized from. And so I said, throw me the ball. And I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw the ball around the room. No one can catch the ball more than once. If you drop it, we have to start over, but we have to count out loud as we do it. And to them, it was just a game. It was fun. But what I knew is that when you are retrieving language, which you have to do when you're counting, you are turning off the amygdala, the fight, flight, or freeze part of your brain. You're turning on that more empathetic, self-compassionate, problem-solving, functional part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex. And in that moment, I'm not explaining to them what I'm doing. I'm not explaining the science behind it, but I probably would later if I saw those kids again, because I want them to understand. And it just changed the mood in the room. So I do think it's very helpful when teachers have a toolkit of strategies that they can bring, particularly when it feels like all is lost.
Hmm. Hmm. And that transcends the ages too. What you're
Yes,
talking about. It
yes.
doesn't matter if they're 10 or 15.
100% or three. If
Mhm.
anybody's a parent on this call and you have a kid who's slugging a sibling and you throw a ball and say, let's see how many times we can throw it back and forth, but let's count as we do it. Same idea, but just a different setting.
Mhm. That's great. I'm going to use that one with my 9-year-old. Okay, fantastic. Well, without further ado, I think we're going to dive right into some of the strategies that you're talking about. I'm going to share this slide, and again, I'm going to encourage people as you hear Phyllis talking about these strategies, feel free to put questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So let's move this.
And feel free to interrupt me because I don't have the chat up.
Okay, so we are now looking at our slide, and we are talking about 10 of Phyllis's favorite strategies. And I sense that this first one that you're starting with, Phyllis, is one we're seeing across the board, sadly. Issues
Yes.
of connectedness and belonging. We know that these are some of the foundational challenges or needs to feel connected, to not feel lonely. So I feel like this one has applications with 99% of our students. So
It's so true. And even kids who are really popular are lonely sometimes. You can be surrounded by friends, but they feel like frenemies, or you have to work really, really hard to stay in that group and you can still be lonely. And I think that's a misconception kids sometimes have, that the popular kids are, they don't have any problems. They're never lonely. And so I think it's important for all kids to know that even socially adept kids, kids who seem to interact with ease with peers, also feel awkward, also feel lonely. Everybody, it's, part of the human condition. And so one of the things that I've spent a lot of time doing with kids is helping them connect. Sometimes, you ask a kid if they're looking for help connecting. I saw there was at least one elementary school counselor on here, and you might see a kid who's outside at recess by themselves and worry that they feel lonely, and they may not. They may just be an introvert, they're recharging their battery, and that they're doing just fine. So I always want to ask how they're doing and what the need is. But one thing that you can always help a kid by doing is giving them concrete strategies. I'll give an example. There was one girl who felt like nobody wanted to talk to her. And so I said, you know what? I want you to try. I just want you to try giving a compliment. Tell somebody something that you like about them. And we talked a little bit about the difference between, a superficial compliment, like I like your Stanley, water bottle, versus an authentic compliment, something that would, resonate and have more meaning for someone. And so this girl, this was a middle schooler, she walked around and everybody she saw, she was giving them compliments. And I started to get a little bit worried that she was overdoing it, but it was amazing. It worked every single time. Every single time. It was just such a small shift, but so powerful. Similarly, asking questions, listening long enough to know what people are talking about and jumping in with a question. And when I share strategies like this with kids, especially ones who are avoiding recess, uh, there was a boy recently who was avoiding PE because he didn't feel as athletic as other kids. There are all kinds of reasons kids feel insecure. But when you give them something to do with that energy, so similarly, role playing a situation. And this was also something I did in a whole class setting. I had the boys, we took a typical scenario, somebody who was being a little clingy and always wanted to talk to this friend on their own and didn't want that friend to talk to other friends too. And that other kid felt kind of crowded and was having a really hard time communicating that they needed a little bit of space because they didn't want to be mean. Kids always they don't want to hurt people's feelings. They're doing the best they can. Most of the time, when it doesn't land well, it's social clumsiness or just lack of experience, or they're just too egocentric to recognize that even if it would hurt their would even if it would hurt their feelings, it would also hurt someone else's feelings. They're only thinking about their own. But when you watch kids and you have them role play a scenario, and in this case, I had two boys in front of the class role play telling someone that they wanted to also sit with other kids at lunch. And you would think that boys, and these were sixth grade boys, you would think they wouldn't want to do this, but I had everybody raising their hand. Can I do it next? Can I do it next?
Hmm.
This is something kids do want to practice these skills and it's fun for them. And so what I was noticing when we were doing the role play, that particular one, what would happen is the kid would say, you know what, I also want to sit with somebody else. And the first kid would say, yeah, but I just want to sit with you today. And it would kind of end there. He would either say, okay, or he would say, no, I'm going to go sit with the other kids. But that was the end of the conversation. And what I realized is kids, when they're trying to resolve a conflict, they don't get beyond that surface level to where there is frustration. And if you seed the conversation with bigger challenges and force them to continue on and continue to engage, you get much more useful information. So when we did that, I was throwing out lines for them. Then what happened was the kid got really frustrated. They both got frustrated. And once they got frustrated, that actually led to the breakthrough where the second kid said, well, I want to sit with you because I don't think those other kids like me. And I'm not really sure what to say to them anyway, because I don't know them that well. And then the first kid had some empathy. He was able to say, oh, no, they like you, and I'll help you if it gets, if you feel awkward. So, really helping kids get beyond to the heart of the problem and really understand other people's perspectives. Uh, when they are mean, whether it's on purpose or not. And I'll share a story. This was a fourth grade kid she made a really, really unkind comment. And the fourth grade teacher heard it and he watched what happened. He could see that there was a girl crying afterwards. And I happened to come out at recess around that time. And he walked over to me and he said, you need to do something because this just happened. And this is something that I'm really trying to underscore for teachers too. If you hear something in real time, say something. You don't, stay really calm, but say, what did you mean by that? Or, uh, that was mean. Anything, it can be something very simple and calm. You're not looking to shame them, but just call it out in real time. If I go back later and I haven't heard it myself and I don't have the context, it just doesn't have the oomph. And I think sometimes we forget that it can be anybody. Anybody in the school setting can help kids be their best selves.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, I would imagine sometimes people want to say, well, let them figure it out, let them work through it. And I feel sometimes as a parent, you're like, well, no, don't get involved. Don't get in the middle of it. Let them work it out. So it's kind of a little bit counter to what we think we
It's
should do
it's
sometimes.
it's even as a parent, if you're in the car and you hear kids in the back seat and they're planning to do something mean, I would pause and say, what do you think will happen when that happens? Now, I do think there's a line, your sixth grader is upset with a friend and they're having a fight. That parent texts the other parent, suddenly you are persona non grata in the friend group because your mom is too much work and nobody
Mhm.
wants to hang out with you. So there is a line, but teachers are teaching anyway. We're teaching how to be a good participant in a group project. We're
Mhm.
teaching them how to resolve conflict. And if we don't talk to them about this stuff, we can't help them. And actually, all the research shows that kids who are mean and don't learn likability skills, how to be a good listener, how to be generous, how to be kind, if they don't master those skills in the K-12 years, they actually have a much greater risk of everything from eating disorders to substance abuse to less higher education to more failed relationships. So I used to have a hard time telling kids when they were mean when I was first starting out, and I don't have any trouble saying just being authentic now because I know that it is in the best interest of the kid.
Wow. Like that's a great reminder, a great, dividing rod to keep us moving forward and to having the encouraging the tough conversations. Um, when it comes to the unpacking that you reference, sort of kind of getting them to move beyond the superficial. I
Yeah.
feel that superficial is probably very common as they try to avoid conflict. So is this best done in a kind of a classroom setting, a role play, like where everyone's participating, so it's not a one-off awkward
Yes, I'll give another example. This was yesterday. We, with one of the other counselors, we did an assembly for the seventh and eighth graders. What had happened is that there were kids who were using really inappropriate language as terms of endearment within their group. And within their group, it was socially acceptable, and they understood that it was, you know, meant in the right spirit. But because seventh and eighth graders don't really have a lot of nuance when it comes to social skills, they would overhear and mimic and do the same thing. And really, none of that should be happening in the school setting anyway. It's just too confusing. So we did an assembly for everybody on, when developing some critical thinking skills about when does a term of endearment create a problem if it involves inappropriate language or inappropriate terminology, and what are the boundaries? Does it feel different if someone uses a phrase that's ambiguous, if it's somebody who you've known a really long time and trust versus somebody who you are just getting to know or feel insecure around because they've teased you in the past? And so those are the kinds of skills that when we teach them, it means everybody is going to feel safer, raising their hand in class. Everybody is going to feel safer having those hard conversations. One of the things that has always frustrated me is that recess is always, and this is true for lunch too, but it's just long enough for kids to get in a fight, but not long enough for them to work it out. So they come back in and they bring all of that energy into the classroom, which is actually where the self-regulation and coping strategies come in, especially for kids who are really sensitive, who can't shake it off. They might need help from a teacher. They may not even recognize that they're dysregulated. I'll never forget the second grader who said to the nurse, "My stomach worries so much it hurts." And, she was astute enough to recognize that the kid needed to talk to me. Sometimes, I'm sending kids to her too because they really do have, some distress that's physical. And, we trade kids back and forth. And again, you really are using everybody in the school setting to support these kids.
Mhm.
But when you've got a student who doesn't even recognize that they're struggling, it can be helpful to have some kind of a strategy. Maybe they put a white pen on their desk or a post-it that indicates that they need a little support, or uh, and conversely, maybe the teacher has a way a prearranged way, maybe they tap them on the shoulder to let them know, I can see you're struggling. Maybe you should take a break. We want to normalize that everybody needs coping strategies. I think
Mhm.
another problem for students is that they try a coping strategy. Maybe it's deep breathing, box breathing, mindfulness, whatever it might be, and it doesn't work for them. And so they conclude that, okay, that that mindfulness doesn't work for me, or coping strategies don't work for me. And what we want is for them to think of it as throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. The
Mhm.
same strategy that works in one scenario isn't going to work in another. If
Mhm.
you're having a really hard time if you're sad because you're lonely, then, it might make sense to spend some time talking to friends. If you're sad because everybody else got 100 on a test and you failed, then you might just need to catch your breath and not be around everybody talking about their 100%. So it just depends on what's going on. And so one of the things that I like to do is any teacher can do it. You can do it as an administrator too. Counselors can do it. Have a jar, get blank popsicle sticks, brainstorm strategies that everybody uses. when they need help self-regulating, write the strategy on one side of the popsicle stick, write their initials, they get credit for it. And then on the other side of the popsicle stick, write when they use that strategy, when it's helpful for them. Teachers do the same. And you can add things. If you see a kid using a really good strategy, you can add that to the jar, ask them to add it to the jar. And then it becomes normal for a kid to just go up and grab a stick. They can try someone else's strategy or try their own. And it also just reinforces the idea that, you know what, you might need to try a bunch of different things before you figure out what works for you in this particular situation.
Mhm. In the world of avoiding stigma, do you encourage sort of a periodic check-in to grab a popsicle stick to remind people of this wealth of strategy in the classroom so that they're
Yeah,
not feeling like, why am I the only one going for the popsicle stick jar?
I think so. And really heaping on the praise for kids when you notice that they're using something. And if you notice a kid using a strategy that they haven't written down, encouraging them, that, oh my gosh, that was such a great idea to, you know, take a lap around the hall. Is that on a popsicle stick yet? You should add that, if not. So that is just sort of part of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And kids, you asked the first question you asked me is what am I seeing? And I definitely am seeing more cutting than I did early on in my career. And really, when you see things like restrictive eating or cutting, it's what you're looking at is a kid who has maladaptive coping strategies. They have coping strategies, they're just bad ones. And so we need to build their toolbox so that they can find ways to self-soothe that don't involve self-harm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see this is the area on the slide where you have the most um, items because clearly you're seeing just a lot of this where there's great stress and students may not realize that there are many ways to address this. So you've spoken to the first two here.
Yeah. So I was really looking for strategies after when kids returned from the pandemic that were not mindfulness because, mindfulness is contraindicated after trauma. It is, we had a lot of kids who were having trouble sitting with their thoughts. And so instead I started doing a lot of using a lot of strategies that involve calming the body to calm the mind,
Mm-hmm.
activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And I was teaching kids how they could do this, how they could calm their body, which would help globally. And there's a few that I have found work really, really well for kids. And it wasn't just a post-pandemic thing. It continues to be really, really powerful for kids. One is tensing and releasing their shoulders. They can give themselves a tight self-hug. They can splash water on their face if they're leaving the classroom. And if you Google activating parasympathetic nervous system, you can find a list of 50 ways to do it. But even more than the specific strategies, what I have found is that when kids understand the science behind why a strategy works rather than it being their teacher's opinion or their parents' opinion. And when they have a very, very concrete, practical strategy that they can walk around, they're actually less likely to get dysregulated in the first place because they feel more in control of their emotions. They know that if they do lose their cool, that there's something they can do to rein themselves back in. And the other thing I've been seeing a lot of in the last few years is test anxiety, presentation anxiety, and avoidance as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the only way to extinguish anxiety is through exposure, small, comfortable exposures, incrementally more intense exposures. The one thing we don't want is for kids to be opting out completely. So I'm always looking for ways to help kids engage in whatever it is they find difficult and keep moving the dial. So object awareness is a very simple strategy. A kid carries an object into the room with them. It could be a paperclip, it could be anything. And right before they start taking the test, they look at that object and they hold it and they come up with 3 adjectives to describe it. And it is the exact same strategy as that ball toss. They're turning on their prefrontal cortex, they're retrieving language. But in this case, it's a very subtle, dignity preserving way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do you, I mean, it's amazing how simple and subtle, to your point, that is. And this really, it helps them come into focus and feel control. And Um, I never would have thought something so simple would actually have that much impact.
Well, if you ask a kid, if you say to a kid who has just lost control, and I'm thinking right now of one particular boy who had been sent to me, which is never the best way to be having a contact with a kid who's upset. He was sent to me because not, well-meaning, but he had really been so dysregulated in class that the teacher suggested he talk to me. And he was so mad that the first thing he did when he came in is pick up a very heavy object next to my desk and huck it at the window behind me. And obviously, that's not the best idea, not going to have the best outcome. And there's all kinds of things you could say in that moment. But what I chose to say was, I bet it felt really bad to lose control because no matter what happens, you want them to learn and be able to have a conversation. You're going, you'll have the consequences conversation. You're going to have the how do you make it better conversation. But first, you need to have their buy-in to have that conversation at all. And starting with a little bit of empathy and telling that kid, I bet it felt really bad to lose control, is so powerful because 100% of the time they say yes. It felt terrible to lose control. Nobody likes to lose control.
Mhm.
And typically, the kids who are losing control more often are kids who just lack skills. They do not know how to get themselves back on track. They need help in the same way that you teach kids, how to read a text or how to learn a world language. So it can be taught and it makes a huge difference.
Mhm. And to your point, I interesting data point about the impact of not gaining control over these things when we're K to 12, because you can absolutely see that if these are things that linger with us into our adulthood, it will have far reaching impacts. I'm curious for folks who are listening, are there any other specific kind of self-regulation strategies that you've had students try that seem to fall into this space of helping students kind of gain control, um, be it the object they carry into the room and describe, be it, starting with the empathy and expression. Not yet, but definitely if something comes to mind, please do feel free to share in the chat. I'm sure we've got a wealth of information and knowledge on this call. I think we do have a question. Um, I have told students to outthink their thoughts. That's
Yeah,
an
I like that. That's
interesting,
that's a great phrase.
yeah.
I like that.
Um, I love that. It's sort of getting ahead. Um, but it does reinforce this notion of you've got this. Like um you can
There's
get ahead of this. You've been here before maybe and you can
There's a phrase that my co-counselor uses that I love. No matter what has happened, the very first thing he says is, "How can we sort this out?" And it just transmits the message that you're redeemable. We're going to get through this. We're going to figure out how we can turn things around. And he says it with this big smile. And sometimes I'm thinking, I'm not really sure how we're going to move forward, but it always goes better if you start from that premise that we can figure this out together.
yeah,
And I'm here to support you.
yeah.
His other phrase that I love is the story I'm telling myself is, and it's very similar to a phrase I use, which is, I'm guessing you did that because,
Oh,
you're
right.
you're trying to give kids runway back, So I'm guessing you cheated because you didn't want to admit you didn't know what you were doing. I'm guessing you skipped class because you were feeling really overwhelmed. Whatever it might be, you're not saying it's okay. You're not saying there's no consequences. You're just saying, I understand. And the great thing, especially for the people on the call who are middle school, the great thing is that if you get it wrong, they will 100% tell you. And then you get good information about what really was getting in their way.
I love it. Um, a question has come up. Uh, how to get this information because they want to share it with their staff. The first thing that I will say is this recording will be sent out. So, as I said, this may not be something that you get to share with your staff in May, but you may want to turn it back on in August if you save the recording to this. Also, this slide will be shared as well, so you'll have the reference. And then I guess I can speak to the fact that the books that I have read of Phyllis's are chock-a-block full of these strategies and stories. So I've reread your books, Phyllis, a number of
Oh, thank
times. I take
you.
them with me and I'm like, oh, I remember this one. This is so good. Because I not only was I an educator in the classroom in the high school, but I have a 10-year-old child. So it's I am right in the middle of it. Um,
Thank you.
Okay, and yes, so that's Cassandra, this will be coming your way. Okay, so let's move into the procrastination and organization. I think this is one that we can all sympathize with. Really, it's not that I didn't want to, it's the 25 other things in the way, but let's dive into this because I do think that avoidance, this is kind of a little akin to the avoidance piece.
Yeah, and that avoidance shows up in different ways. It could be the kid, it could be the third grader who gets to a hard problem and then doesn't even realize you can just keep going. You can circle it and keep going, and they just stop. It could be the eighth grader who can't even put anything down on paper because they feel so stuck with what to write for, the answer to some prompt. And what we want is for kids to simply get started because you get a hit of dopamine. That reward chemical can keep you going. If you have a kid who doesn't want to go on a bike ride and you say to them, if you only have to go for 5 minutes. If after 5 minutes you're not having fun, you can turn around and go home. You're not going to have a kid who's going to turn around and go home. They're going to keep bike riding. And it's the same thing with academics. Just helping them take their stuff out of their binder and putting it on the desk, having them write their name and the date, having them even write down the question again, but anything that gets them in the mindset that they're doing this. It's going to happen. Yeah, and that's called behavior activation. There's research behind that. Um, and this is sort of a related idea about when I work with kids in private practice, that one of the first things I do for kids who are emotionally overwhelmed is I ask them to bring their backpack and we go through their planner and their backpack and sort things out because kids, as especially kids as they're going through puberty, and I'm going to include even up through 10th, 11th grade, you've got a lot of transitions going on. We brought in a speaker to talk to the 12th graders last week about the transition to college. At any phase, you're going to have different challenges, but you are better equipped to handle the emotional stressors if you feel organized, if you don't feel like you're just surrounded by papers and old banana peels and whatever, old dirty gym clothes. And it's just about giving kids back a little back sense of control back.
Mhm.
So it clears space. Similarly, cognitive offloading is the idea that you take out all the things in your head. It could be your to-do list. It could be that you need to bring in a permission slip for a teacher. It could be that you have practice after school or an away game and you need to arrange a ride. It could be anything, but you write it all down on a piece of paper. You just get it out of your head and on a piece of paper. Even if you never look at that piece of paper again, it not only can help you feel more organized, it also clears out space to manage all of the emotional stress. So kids do better emotionally when they're more organized. So that's cognitive offloading. A very specific strategy that I like with cognitive offloading is to take one piece of paper, fold it in half, get one ideally the same size as that planner that half of them aren't using anyway. And then the left side of the paper is today, the right side is tomorrow. They make a list the night before of all the things they have to do that are due that next day. And it could be also, making plans with a friend, but writing it all down on the left and then bring it to school. And over the course of the day on that tomorrow side, if new things come up, you're adding it to the today side. So the tomorrow side stays blank during the school day. As you complete things like you take a Spanish quiz, you cross it out. And that night, you look at that list, the today list, and you move everything to the right that's either new or wasn't that you didn't do, then get a new piece of paper and start over. Just developmentally, kids do so much better if they have one visual in front of them that captures everything on their plate, rather than expecting them to be, opening a planner to the right day of the month or even flipping through and seeing what's coming. It's just really hard, and it's that future planning skill doesn't even kick in until age 15. So I have to tell parents a lot that their kids aren't lazy. They literally don't have those executive functioning skills yet. It's just like social skills. You have to teach them. And the one commonality for all of these is that whether it's social skills or coping skills or ways to stay organized, the idea is that by teaching kids concrete skills, you actually it's preventative. You're helping them manage the emotional stuff and maybe warding off depression or anxiety and giving them back a sense of control. And I think, especially at a time when there's a lot of, different schools have different attitudes about how much social emotional work people are doing within this school setting. And this is not controversial. These are all just strategies that you can teach kids, but they have the positive byproduct of also changing the culture and changing kids, improving kids' well-being. And then the last one there, I'll just throw it out there. I think it's just such interesting research. Something that's interesting about younger adolescents. So for anybody who's working with kids, you know, 11 to 15, I would say they don't do better when they think the stakes are high. In fact, they do worse. Which frustrates parents to no end, because if something is really important, they would expect that the kid would spend more time on it and devote more energy to making sure it went well. But the opposite is true. And the research shows that using that simple phrase that this is just rough draft thinking before kids share an idea actually loosens their thinking and makes them much more likely to contribute to the classroom discussion, which I think is fascinating.
Hmm. That is certainly a classroom strategy to be encouraged too, though, right?
Oh,
Because
that's exactly where I'm envisioning it being used.
yeah, yeah, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, you know, these are universal strategies, right? If every teacher were to like encourage, like this is how we help break through. This is how we, break the ice, and get them to warm up and start engaging. Um, you wouldn't want certain students to be thinking, certain educators to be thinking this way. In other classes, it's like the lockdown approach that, locking up the student's mind. We need to kind of encourage a culture of
Yes.
how to open up the student's mind to engage.
And there might be some teachers who feel better equipped to share the organizational strategies and others who
Mhm.
are more attuned to the social dynamics in the classroom. And I really do believe teachers should play to their strengths
Yeah.
and their interests. It could be that there's something you don't know, but if you would like to learn it and do it because it will make your job easier. And all of these things their short-term expenditure of energy, but it makes their work so much easier in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, no, I love it. Any thoughts or questions for Phyllis on these particular strategies? Um, I again, chock a block full of tips and tricks to take away that are so critical. And again, Phyllis, what you're saying is that you're seeing these either whole school approaches or classroom approaches across the grades. This is not just a grade 6 through 8. This could be, 15 to
Oh,
18.
100%. Right now I'm in a 3 through 12. I've been in a K through 8. I've been in a 9 through 12. I've been in a K to 5. I've been in all kinds of settings.
Mhm.
One of the takeaways for me the last several years is that everybody is struggling with these things, to different degrees
Yeah.
and different ways, but everybody is hungry for strategies
Mhm.
and support and help.
Mhm.
And it's just such a gift if teachers can and administrators and counselors and everyone can work together. And sometimes it's bigger than something a teacher can manage. And if they have a relationship with the student, but the student may not know the counselor that well, I really recommend walking the kid to the counselor rather than just telling the counselor and
Mhm.
helping the kid just share their story. Because what you're saying is, I trust this person and you can too.
Mhm.
And just paving the way. I There are going to be issues that are outside the purview of teachers, and it is appropriate to outsource it to the counselor or somebody outside the building entirely with the counselor support. And that's okay too. But the habits, it's really the habits that you're incorporating and teaching into in the classroom
Mhm.
are going to help ward off some of those bigger issues.
Yeah, absolutely. A comment in the chat I agree with. And this is something that I've noticed in your books as well is there are things we don't realize our students developmentally aren't ready to do that we want them to do and just assume that they should because we're just going to ask for it. But what they have the capacity for before 15 and later, that's the big aha. And um, I have noticed that in your books where there are certain things and you're like, well, this is just very natural at this age. This is not unusual. And I think when it comes to talking to parents, um, you've had some great counsel there about how to engage parents about some of the things that come up. And so I'm going to ask you to speak to that in a moment. But there are a couple questions that have come up here in the Q&A. Would you say these tips need to be used even with much older students like 17 and 18 based on what they experienced in COVID? Also, do you have assessments that help gauge where a child is in the SEL or self-regulation range?
Oh, that second question is a hard one. It would be an interesting checklist to create. We've got checklists for ADHD, we've got all kinds of checklists, but I would say that the self-assessment piece is more important even than the outside observer. If you have a kid who feels like they're awkward, even if they're actually very skilled, but as a result, they're not making plans with friends or talking to people, then you're going to need to work with them anyway. I have a high school junior. I think these are universal. I think that everybody, is like, as I said, about 18 to 24 months behind where you would expect based on skills. And a lot of that, so a junior in high school or a senior in high school, that means they were in sixth or seventh grade. And if you think about sixth and seventh grade, those are such key years for learning a lot of the interpersonal stuff. Plus, these are kids who probably got a phone earlier, perhaps, or certainly spent more time on it at such a critical age than older kids were. So I 100% think that anyone who's 17 or 18 right now is going to need all of these strategies as well. And it's not like the world has gotten less complicated. There's still so many things going on, and kids internalize a lot of it, and they pick up on the stress of the adults around them, and they're mood catchers just like we are. And so offering support, they might say no. And I am a big proponent of asking, just saying, I just want you to know, every teacher can do this. I want you to know that I'm here to help you. I might have to be the bridge and help you find the right person to help you, but I want to help you and I'm here for you. And when I've witnessed teachers do that, they have never, ever had an experience where they didn't have one or two kids come back later and either say they needed support or they were worried about a friend. So it's really about offering it up. And I think you will be surprised, if you haven't tried this yet, you'll be surprised how somebody is going to take you up on it. There are a lot of kids who don't, and this is research shows boys are more likely to have trouble asking for help, especially if they're lonely, than girls. And offering it, particularly to boys, can actually open the gates and even plant the idea that they can ask for support.
Hmm. So true. So true. Another great question is I work in administration, so my interaction with students is sparse. How do you build the trust to discuss these topics when you don't have the time to build the foundations of trust that may be necessary to discuss these topics? So, especially,
Meaning, like, you
yeah.
might be seeing a kid only because they're referred to the office, and it's hard in that moment to
You don't have
focus.
the day-to-day interaction as
Yeah,
much as the teacher.
yeah.
Hmm.
I think there are certain things that you can be really careful about with your language. I like phrases like "I wonder," or, I've noticed that whenever you're with that particular group, it seems like things go off the rails. I wonder if you've tried XYZ. Those are It sort of strips away the judgment from whatever follows. I also think like that those kinds of comment, just that anything that transmits empathy. Kids are so hungry for understanding that you don't have to have a long history with somebody for them to trust you or open up to you, as long as, and again, that's where that line, how can we sort this out? We're going to sort this out is so important. It might not be that, it might be harder to teach them a concrete strategy in that moment. But if you know that they're struggling and that's why they're in your office, you can ask them, hey, can we meet? Can we talk again? I'd love to hear how you're doing. Maybe we can, when they're not in trouble, when they're not being sent or, you know, interacting with you for that reason.
Hmm. Hmm. That's fantastic. Um, so I know we are, as expected, you are such a wealth of knowledge that we are almost at the top of the hour here. Um, and one really quick question before I jump into the last piece, because I did say there was a little treat here at the end for those of you who are with us. I'm going to get to that in just 1 minute. But I wanted to ask you, Phyllis, like again, with parents, how much do you see, there's obviously supporting the student during the day and teachers and counselors and administrators having these strategies for helping kind of, you know, loosen things up or break the ice and help the student take, put one foot in front of the other. Um, how much are you working with parents as far as, or how much are schools working with parents very proactively on some of these things? What have you seen to be the most effective way to work with families?
So I think finding ways to bring parents into the community to develop a common language, whether it's PD, bringing in a speaker to talk about the developmental phase, to talk about where kids are, to normalize for them to have an opportunity to interact with other parents. One of my favorite events at the school that I'm at now, that I take zero credit for, this is something that was happening before I arrived. They have a spaghetti dinner where parents come with their kids and then they sit at tables with other people's kids and there are conversation starters. And it's an opportunity for them to develop some empathy for their kids and what they're going through. And that's followed by a presentation from an expert on one topic or another, whatever happens to be needed. And then I think it's particularly helpful if whoever that presenter is also talking to the staff, so that you have the parents, you have the students, you have the staff all using that common language and
Mhm.
working together.
I like that. Very nice. Um, okay. That's
And I like book
exciting.
clubs because I think
Mhm.
there's always a group of parents who they're not going to read the book probably, but they are so hungry to come and have interaction with other parents.
Mhm.
And often those parents will discover that their kids are both struggling and might even be good friends for one another. It's just all of these openings for finding ways to bridge that loneliness that I think a lot of parents feel it too, feel less connected to other parents in the community.
So true. Wow. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I am going to, I think I am still sharing. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Phyllis, for sharing so many great strategies. I do feel like people have come away from this this hour with a lot of tangible approaches, and I think just a mindset, a philosophy of hope. I hope because I certainly feel that. Um, Phyllis, I'm going to invite you to just share a couple of thoughts about what you're working on and what you're open to. Mhm.
Yeah. So early on, I was talking about the role playing and how we have to get kids to the point of frustration to really develop the understanding and the skills and to really practice. And so I'm working on an app that helps kids, whether it's on their own. Maybe they're afraid to practice social skills in front of other people, or in the classroom setting, or in a small group setting for counselors. And we're still in the beta testing phase, but if anyone is interested in testing it out and working with us to, refine it a little bit, please feel free to reach out. My email is right there, contact phyllisfagel@gmail.com. In a week or two, I also have a kids book for the elementary school teachers coming out. It's called The Wonder Box. It's based on a real situation in my last school with a couple of kids, and it's about how everyone is really struggling with something. One kid struggles socially, and the other one struggles with writing. And there's, more to it, but if you are interested in information about that, please let me know. And that will come with an activity workbook as well, so that you can use it with lots and lots of activities in the school setting to work on the same skills that I've been talking about today, only with younger kids.
Very, very exciting. And I did some role play with Phyllis on the app, and it was really cool. It's a great coach for student or adult. Um, so I hope some people will reach out to her about that. And then finally, of course, we certainly at IntelliSpark love to hear, what are some of the challenges around integrated student support that you're trying to solve, and happy to share strategies that some of our partners are um, implementing and some of the successes that they're having. So would love to hear from you as well. Want to thank you all for carving out this time on a May afternoon. Who knew that a webinar could be so compelling at this time of year when everyone's so tired? But thank you for your engagement, for your attention. Phyllis, thank you so much for carving out time amidst all of the things that you're working on. Really rich. And we wish you all a wonderful May and a smooth sailing through the end of the school year and a rejuvenating summer. And don't forget to watch the webinar again in August to get some of those ideas and share it with your staff. Thank you so much. Phyllis, thank you. And
Thanks
I'll
to
talk
everyone for
soon.
coming.